Welcome to. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Climate and Environmental Committee meeting for the 20th of February 2025. I'd like to welcome everyone who's present in the chambers, staff, and those online. Also, we have Cam Butler, who's attending as a replacement for Simon Butler, who's put in an apology. And we have our Mayor online, and we have Kim Tahiwi online as well. Thank you very much. So now we'll move on to the council blessing, and Mr. Moore will take us through that. Thank you, Michael.
As we deliberate on the issues before us, we trust that we will reflect positively on the communities we serve. Let us all seek to be effective and just, so that with courage, vision and energy, we provide positive leadership in a spirit of harmony and compassion.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. So we'll move on to item 3, which are apologies. As I said earlier on, we have one apology from Simon Black, from Chair of the Otaki Community Board. Are there any other apologies? So I'll move those apologies. Seconder for those? Councillor Hanford, thank you. So we'll now move on to item 4, which are declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda. I haven't had any brought to my attention. Are there any others that would like members would like to bring forward? Thank you. So now we'll move on to item 5, which is public speaking. We have one person speaking here, Michelle Lewis, who's speaking, I assume, on behalf of the Waikanai Garden Precinct Protection Society in relation to item 8.1. Welcome, Michelle. So we have about a 3-minute limit, but we'll just see how things go. Thank you, Michelle.
I'll just pass some papers around. On this side, if you just want to take one sheet, maybe one between two, just to a visual. And on that side, if you take one of the red and one of the green together and then pass them down, there should be one between two-ish roughly, and there should be one section for the end table. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm here as the chair of the Waikanai Garden Precinct Protection Society Incorporated. Our aim is to protect, preserve and enhance the special character attributes of the precinct. The society formed following a public meeting attended by over 200 people in October 2020 after council approved an application in the precinct for medium density housing permitted due to Plan Change 2. Prior to the adoption of Policy 3 of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development in Plan Change 2 in 2023, the district plan specified 3 special character areas deemed to have high amenity value for protection from undue intensification. These were primarily protected by way of minimum lot sizes. These protections were removed when the National Policy Statement on Urban Development was adopted by Council. The special character of the Waikanai Garden Precinct is due to the large lot sizes, a mixture of exotic and indigenous trees over 8 metres in height, and small building footprints relative to lot size. This effectively contributes to a corridor for indigenous birds connecting Kapiti Island with the Tararuas, thus enhancing protection of our native fauna. Taking advantage of the new policy, a developer purchased a half-hectare property at 14 to 16 Narara Road and received consent to subdivide it into 21 lots with 20 dwellings. Under the MDRS, they could have put 40 dwellings on the property. In the redevelopment process, they have removed virtually all the vegetation from the property, and you'll see that on those images. They have destroyed an amenity of the neighbourhood that was highly valued by residents. Meanwhile, Council made other accommodations to facilitate the project, including in relation to impermeable site coverage, despite recent flooding in the area. As the matters currently stand, this has set a precedent for similar developments. The Council assessment deemed the effects of this development to be less than minor and consequently did not notify the resource consent application. The development has aroused considerable distress in the community. We consider the MDRS in its present form is a crude and unsophisticated instrument which has the potential to significantly alter the character of significant swathes of Kapiti. Land available for commercial and residential development in the district exceeded the requirement for 30 years' supply of housing and development even before the MDRS was adopted. We're therefore at a loss to understand why Council took the approach it did in Plan Change 2, when other larger Tier 1 councils found ways not to implement the MDRS and not to destroy their own character areas. Some local residents have gone to the extent of placing covenants on their properties to protect them from such developments that significantly alter the amenity value of their environment. The Society is actively seeking the reinstatement of previous protections for the special character of the Waikanae Garden Precinct. With or without the support of Council, a private plan change will be undertaken if this proved necessary. None of this would be necessary if the Council had used available flexibility, let alone had greater flexibility to opt out of the MDRMS. We ask that Council do everything possible within the shortest timeframes available to it to opt out of the MDRS and reinstate the previous or enhancement of previous rules of the Waikanae Garden Precinct to retain its special character. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Do I have any questions from the committee? Councillor Warwick.
Just one. What are the other councils that opted out? You said there were other Tier 1 councils.
The ones that we regularly talk about are the decisions that Tauranga and Christchurch made.
Tauranga and Christchurch?
Yeah. I can certainly get some more information if that would be helpful.
Mr Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with a development such as this, is there any mitigating measures you think they could have put in place to have this medium density there, but still retain some of the character? Like, I can see the damage that has been done. Is there anything that they can do from here to, in your eyes, to mitigate some of the loss of trees, etc.?
Well, the development has proceeded and Council's given it permission, so even as Council, you would not be able to go back and do anything. The damage is done on that one, and we've had to accept that.
Yeah, but I understand that, but my question is different. My question is, what do you feel the developer could do from here to actually bring back some of the character in terms of planting trees? Because what's done is done, but how can we mitigate some of that in your eyes?
Well, we can't do any mitigation. That's what I'm saying. We can't do any mitigation on that site now. But going forward, on any future sites, there, and what I should say is that we are not opposed to development. So, for example, on that particular development, many of our members would have been quite happy with the development of 5 houses where most of the vegetation has been retained. So it's not that we're opposed to development in the area per se. So there is a Boffin-Miskell report which lists the characters of the area, which is those contiguous fronts of gardens with vegetation and maintenance of large trees in the area. But I would suggest referring always to the Boffin-Miskell report that we had done, which I believe has been used by council staff to try and identify the special character of the area.
Thank you.
Before we go on to the next person who's got questions, I'll just welcome Hirawai Paki, who's online. Thank you. So, Mr Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to endorse what Michelle has presented to this committee today. The Garden Precinct people who are advocating and been trying to highlight this important issue have come before the Waikanae Community Board, which Michelle is a member as well, and highlighted the egregious way in which this has occurred. And you can only, as Michelle's clearly presented us with these photos, you know, anybody should be horrified from what's going around in such a really unique area of Waikanae, and not only the environmental devastation that's occurring through some of these things, but I'd ask this committee to give this some really serious contemplation on how we move this forward. Mitigation is difficult when things are ripped down, you know, we've seen it in other areas, but this particular area and precinct deserves recognition and protection going forward. So that's what I'd just like to endorse what Michelle's presented to us today. No, it's not a question.
Thank you, Mr Moore. I know that wasn't a question, but I'll let it pass. Councillor Cooper.
Thanks, Michelle. I tend to agree with everything you said. But just a question in terms of the garden belt area or the special interest area. Is it defined,
Yes.
or so it's actually defined on a map somewhere with lines around it?
If you look at the previous version of the District Plan 1999 version, you can actually see the area. Yeah, it pretty much extends from the town centre, from the State Highway 1 across to, let's say, the overhead power cables for National Grid through there, and then to the north, just from the river up to sort of just north of the park area. But it's on an old 1999 District Plan map, still available online yet if you need it. Which
So I'm assuming there was quite a bit of work done when that area was designated or set out.
before my time, but
Yeah.
there's obviously been a lot of work,
Some work
done
done
by
on
our
it.
predecessors, which was
Yep.
completely wiped out in one sweep with the District Plan Change 2.
Do you think? That's good to know. Thank you. Possibly I should have already known that. Do you think the new urban panel, will have much of an impact in terms of mitigating some of these sparse-looking developments?
No.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. Oh, just one last
And
question.
I'll just qualify that. That's with my background in urban design and having worked with urban design panels across the country. And we've had, the Mayor has been to our meetings, and we've expressed our concerns to her on that and offered to provide assistance in how that should work. The issue we have here is this is not a normal urban development area. It's not like our Auckland, it's not like our Wellingtons. And to quantify it as an urban area it's completely different. If we look at how we reviewed Mitre 10, for example, that just here in Kapiti, that was done with special urban design input. And the original consent required it to blend in more and have much more landscaping. And you'll see over time, as they've obviously done maintenance, all of those consent conditions have just gone by the board. So I just provide that as additional evidence.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. I'll just move on to Councillor Halliday. So just noting that Councillor Halliday is not a member of this committee, but he's more than able to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for indulging me, Madam Chair. Next, Madam Mayor, but Madam Chair, thank you for bringing this to the table, Michelle. And just firstly, I just wanted to say fully support the kaupapa of what you're doing here. Are you aware that and I may have missed this as I missed the beginning of the presentation, that the Garden Precinct and 3 beach precincts were in the district plan before PC2?
Yes.
Yeah, so the reason I bring that up is because I know through that process there was a lot of talk about how do we protect those areas, how do we, and we were pretty much well advised that just wasn't possible in regards to the settings that the government had put on us as such. And whether that be right or wrong at this stage, happy to be looking at investigating that as such, but we are where we're at. Would it be a fair comment to say that KCDC is working with you with regards to in a positive way to try and see how we can remedy this situation?
I would say they are open to conversations.
Open to conversations.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so
So there is definitely, they're meeting with us
Yeah.
and share. In terms of whether they go that step further, I'm not sure. Like, I
What would
read in the conditions of the recommendations today, and I feel one of them might be a little bit weak, and we could push back more as a council.
righto. No, that's fine as long as council is working with you in a constructive manner around this. And are you getting support from your local councillors and local community board, etc., in this space?
So yeah, we've got support from the community board. We've got a minute at one of the previous community board meetings which went through council. We've met with the mayor, and we've also met with our local MP, and it's been very supportive. So we've got clear direction as to the intent from National as to what they are looking for and what they're not looking for.
And would it be a fair comment that National's great coming in now, but we were dealing with the Labor government and their rules at the time of PC2, which bled through a little bit. I guess what I'm saying is that fully understand what you're saying and very supportive of what you're doing. I'm under the impression that we're trying to resolve this in a positive way. So thank you for bringing it to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Halliday. So thank you, Michelle, for coming to raise this matter, and it's very topical given 8.1 that's on our agenda. So I just want to say that obviously I'm I'm the Waikanae Ward Councillor, but I'm not on the community board, so I've had no input into what the community board's view is on this. So, so from where I am sitting, it's a case of where there's, in a nutshell, there's two choices there's probably three choices that the Garden Precinct community has. One is to do nothing, one is to do a plan change, and one is for council to do something that actually removes the need for you to do one. Is that in a nutshell?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
There is time implications because obviously we are concerned that the longer the time goes on, as every time a property gets sold, there's that potential for development. And so obviously the earlier we can get a notification that there is an intent to reinstate some provisions to protect the special character, they can be considered in a consent application. Which is why we may need to do a private plan change in advance of council if council can't push anything through faster.
Thank you. So in the paper that we have in front of us, it talks about us considering whether or not we actually opt out of the MDRS. And then it also talks about if we do that, we've got to have 30 years growth. So we have, in fact, I think it was actually the day before the council had to go down this path, we put out for public consultation our growth strategy in 2022. In terms of reading this paper and then potentially, and this is something I just want to, you may know more about this than me, but this is something that we all need to think about, is that when we look at our the council work plan, I'm not sure that that growth strategy is actually on it. Are you aware that it is? Given the conversations, okay, well maybe we'll have that conversation later on, because that to me is key to how we progress in terms of whether we opt in or out, because we need to have an understanding of our overall growth strategy going forward. Does that make sense?
It's my understanding that from my members that there is the sufficient housing for that 30 years, as I said in my, and it's considered from the conversations we've had with MPs, etc. It's about a rolling 30-year programme, so demonstrating that there's that rolling 30 years.
And obviously in that growth strategy, the Garden Precinct is identified as the Garden Precinct, as an area of special character.
I don't know the answer to that, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, yeah. Thank you. So thank you very much for coming along. You're more than welcome to stay for this paper when it comes up. So thank you everyone else. So now we'll move on to our, that ends our public speaking time. So now we'll move on to item 6, which are deputations. I have had none brought to my attention. So now we'll move on to item 7, which is members' business. Any leaves of absence that you'd like to provide to me, or you can go straight through the Mayor's office if you prefer. Matters of an urgent nature, I haven't had any brought to my attention. And any members' business, there's none there as well. So now we'll move on to item 8, which are updates. And so the very first item is 8.1, which is the potential implications of the RMA amendments for special character areas in the district plan. And Mr. Jason Holland is going to come up and speak to that paper. Thank you. Welcome, Jason.
Madam Chair, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this paper. Look, it's obviously a very topical issue, and I did want to open up by actually thanking very much the members of Michelle's group who I've met with in the last month or so. It's been great to meet Murray. You've got a really good team of people who I've had the opportunity to meet as well. and I'm really confident we're going to be able to collaborate together really effectively on this issue going forward. So that's been great. The paper that you have in front of you has got some key messages in it. I guess one of the key messages underlying this paper is that there's been a signal of a very significant shift in central government direction in this space. Those of you who were around the council table when Plan Change 2 got developed and ultimately council made the decision to accept the panel's recommendations on that will recall that there were some very directive elements of the central government direction, like the medium density residential standards and the fact that they needed to be applied to relevant residential zones in areas like Kapiti Tier 1 districts. That was quite unusual. There hadn't been, that I'm really aware of, an RMA amendment that slotted in provisions that actually directed councils like us to be so specific in their district plans as to actually implement density standards in their district plans before. It was a very directive step by central government to do that. And around the country, there were, I forget the exact number of Tier 1 councils, roughly 10 to 15, who all had to jump when central government said jump. And most of them have actually put in place a plan change to introduce those medium density residential standards because that's what government told them to do. And I think there probably is a bit of a feeling around the country that those standards were one size fits all. But councils have got obligations to implement central government directives. And so those around the council table at the time when Plan Change 2 were developed did get advice that in fact there are some things that you might not choose to do if you had discretion, but the advice to council at the time was, well, I'm afraid there are some things here that you're actually going to have to change about the district plan. Things like the degree to which areas like special character areas could continue to have protective mechanisms over their low density nature. That approach to planning was a direct rub against what central government was directing councils to do, and it did result in significant changes to the district plan. A little bit of clarification. There is still a Waikanai Garden precinct. There are still beach character precincts. They still do exist in the current district plan. There are still mapped areas that set out the boundaries. And to a lesser extent than before, there are some efforts in the district plan to ensure consideration of the special values of those areas. Now, I'm not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes here. They are watered down significantly as a result of Plan Change 2. Council knew that when it made its decisions, but it received advice that in order to give effect to central government direction, it needed to do something in those areas to enable more density. And so that's what council did, and those are the decisions that it made. Now we have a signal from central government, and more than a signal, it's actually an RM amendment bill that's going through the process, that actually this government wants to give councils the chance to take a fresh look at the medium density residential standards. The amendment bill, which council has made a submission on, and its submission is online and there is a link to it in the paper, council, that submission actually is supportive of having a fresh look. And in fact, the council submission not only is supportive of having a fresh look at the MDRS, but in fact, the ability to have a fresh look at how it implemented Policy 3 of the National Policy Statement for Urban Development. And if I just explain why that's an additional component, central government said you must, across all relevant residential zones, put the medium density residential standards in place. And those are the things that changed the district plan in such a way that they removed or replaced protective mechanisms around, like the distance between a building and the side yard, the distance between a building and the front yard, that kind of thing. Those kind of protections were in the district plan to protect and make sure low density was how we grew. The medium density residential standards flopped over the top of that and meant that those protections were no longer in place. Policy 3 was actually about intensification around centres, and actually it was directing greater heights and greater density, in effect, around centres. And while there are some good reasons for that, Plan Change 2 in the Waikanae Garden Precinct area, actually there's two elements to this. There is the degree of extra intensification around the town centre and the rapid transit stop, the railway station. That covers a decent proportion of the Waikanae Garden Precinct. And there's the MDRS, which covers the rest of it because it's residential zone. So council has actually put a submission into government that says, in your amendment bill, give us the chance, if we so choose, to look at all of it again. Now, it's not prejudicing what council might choose in this space. It is just saying, if there is a community expectation, and we know that there is, which council in the future wants to decide to take a fresh look at, why not have the ability to take a fresh look at the whole thing? So I think council's submission is very much looking to give the future council the opportunity to have a really good look at the concerns that the Waikanae Garden Precinct group have voiced. There are a couple of reality checks in this paper. One of them is, at the moment, this is just a bill. The law is right now the same as it was when council put PC2 in place. This is just a bill. The bill is looking to set in train some steps for councils to relook at the MDRS, and if council submission is accepted, it would be able to look at other things, but we don't know that yet. The first step is what's called a ratification decision. And the bill is saying, within 12 months of the relevant section of the Act that would provide for this decision, or require this decision, I should say, to be made, within 12 months, council would need to decide whether to retain, remove, or amend the MDRS in its plan. I just want to really focus in on that 12 months thing. So, that 12 months starts after the bill turns into law and that relevant section has legal effect. We don't know when the bill will turn into law, but the signals are that it's likely to be second half of this year. Who knows when? Could be middle of the year, could be the end of the year, depends who you talk to on whatever given week. 12 months starts after that. So this paper is trying to be very clear with you that that decision can't be made until the bill turns into law and the relevant section comes into effect. And that's not going to be for quite some time. So you've got to count 12 months after that. Within that period of time, council needs to make that decision, according to the bill, whether to basically accept or reject or fiddle with the MDRS settings. After that decision, then comes, okay, well, based on whenever it is that decision is made, what's council going to do about it? Those are steps after that. It's a future step after the ratification vote. So there is some time that will pass. That's why this paper is saying now's not the time to make the decision. Actually, it's also saying, in all likelihood, it's likely to be the next council who will be asked to make that decision because of the timing that the bill will turn into law and the timing of when the relevant section comes into effect. So those are a few of the key messages in here. But when you read through the recommendations, you will also see that the committee or the endorsement is being sought from the committee to initiate work so that when it is time for council to make that decision, we're able to give you, the future council, the best advice we can about your options. And that will include things around understanding what 30 years housing growth means and how well we're lined up with it, keeping in mind that until that revised national policy statement for urban development is put out there, and the paper talks about that a little bit, we actually don't know what government is meaning by 30 years housing growth or intending to mean, because that's going to be in a revised NPS urban development that they haven't even released yet. So things are a little bit back to the front, and a lot of submissions, I think, will probably alert government to the fact that that's not ideal. It would have been nice to know that a bit earlier. A lot of water to go under the bridge, but it would be helpful if the committee was able to support particularly recommendation A4 so that we can, as staff, get some balls rolling, get some work underway, and continue to collaborate with groups like the Waikanae Garden Precinct. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. We'll move on to Councillor Coe. Questions?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, sounds like there's a lot of water to go under the bridge. But look, this is an item of extreme interest, particularly to those people who are in the Waikanae Garden Precinct. I'm just wondering what is being done in terms of communication with people, particularly in that area, around what's happening and what council's view is, and what we can do in this space to just signal to people, hey, and maybe we can do it after today if we approve these recommendations, to do some kind of press release, or I don't know where that's going to get published, but anyway, but even to meet with, say the Waikanae Garden Society, whatever it is, Garden Precinct people, to just explain to them what council's doing in this area, because yeah, it's something that's obviously causing a few people to perhaps lose some sleep at night, and I think it's a really important one to communicate really well with our community about. Yeah. So I guess that's the question. What sort of comms are we doing in this space?
Yeah.
And when?
Yeah, thank you. So I guess putting a paper like this out there in the public agenda is in a way that maybe one of the first steps publicly, I guess, to give council the ability to do something like endorse work, recognising the degree of community interest. As I mentioned, I have had 2 meetings already with members of the group. Look, I'd be more than happy to attend a wider gathering if I was invited, and that would help.
Right. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coe. Now move on to Mr. Judge for questions.
Thank you, Chair. One thing about just seeking clarification, then a question. So right now, with regard to the special character areas, are the less restrictive elements in force or not today?
The less restrictive.
So
elements.
the more restrictive.
So what Plan Change 2 did, actually from notification of Plan Change 2, so that was about August 2022, government said we want the medium density residential standards to have immediate legal effect. So there's actually been, if you like, the watering down of the protections for the MDRS part of the Waikanae Garden Precinct has actually been in place since August 2022. And then now it's fully operative, Plan Change 2. It's now absorbed into the district plan, so the MDRS has complete, full legal effect.
Okay. So just with, I'm from Paikakariki, I'm from here, from the Paikakariki Community Board. So the beach residential precinct in Paikakariki, that's now all watered down as of today?
That's right.
Okay.
Relative to pre-PC2, that's right.
Okay. And my second question is that you've talked about this bill going through with regard to density and zoning, etc. Do you have a sort of a wider knowledge of what the intersection of that piece of legislation will be with any other legislation or current legislation that's in force with regard to natural hazards, because clearly you don't want to be forced into permitting medium density or higher density somewhere that's in a natural hazard zone that you wouldn't, where it would be crazy to build.
Yeah, absolutely. And when government did its first set of amendments that said you shall put the MDRS everywhere in relevant residential zones, to be fair, it did allow for outs, but limited range of outs. They're called qualifying matters.
Okay.
And there are a range of qualifying matters in the district plan which effectively mean that the MDRS doesn't apply on the sites where the qualifying matter applies. Things like flood hazard areas are listed as qualifying matter areas, which means that that level of intensification can't just automatically occur. There is the existing flood hazard rules, by way of example, that still apply and must be met. The MDRS didn't knock them out. Similarly, protections around trees, and there was actually quite a bit of dialogue around the council table when Plan Change 2 was being developed. In terms of areas like the Waikanai Garden Precinct and the fact that there are qualifying matters around ecological sites, of which there are some in the Waikanai Garden Precinct, the notable tree list, again, there are quite a reasonable number of those in the Waikanai Garden Precinct area, and key indigenous tree species. Those protections are unchanged by Plan Change 2. They continue to live on as qualifying matters and have the effect, unless somebody gets a resource consent to be able to remove any of those things, which is not easy, they do effectively sort of push down or de-stimulate intensification in areas like the Waikanai Garden Precinct area. So those tree protections actually weren't fiddled with Plan Change 2.
Okay, thank you.
So before we move on to the next speaker, I just wanted to follow up on a question that Christian had. So in paragraph 5 here, it talks about the development of beach resident precincts assessed against a design guide. And I'm just wondering how, given the implementation of PC2, how much does that actually pull back to protect those areas, or doesn't it really, because it's a guide, I take it, and it's not actually a requirement? So how much does it protect those areas from where they were initially?
So my understanding is that was actually removed as part of Plan Change 2. That part of the paper is talking about what it was pre-PC2, and if I recall correctly, that design guide is no longer in the district plan as a result of Plan Change 2. So that's part of the story that's being told in this paper around you had a series of protections pre-Plan Change 2. Government came in and said you need to be striving for density, and councils had to respond by looking at their existing settings and going, do they align with what government is telling us to do? And where they didn't, the direction was very strong that needed to be changed. And so that's what Plan Change 2 did.
Thank you for that clarification. So now we'll move on to Mr. Sutton.
Thank you, Jason, for the great presentation, and the paper is good. And I'm linking this to public speaking from Michelle, and I'd like to ask you for your reaction to Michelle's made a couple of points. And Michelle, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the first one of how that signal is put into the. You talked about putting a signal, the council doing something to signal that this area would be protected. And I'd like to get Jason's response to that, and also to the idea of a private plan change and how useful that is to protect these areas and move this process forward in a way that the residents can appreciate.
Thanks, Tim. So I might turn to the second one of those two first. It is a topic that I think is an ongoing conversation. I have talked about it with the members of the Wakanai Garden Precinct group that I've mentioned. So it's an ongoing conversation, and I don't mean to give any impression that I've got like a fixed view on it at all. But to be frank, I have signalled a question in my mind as to how a private plan change as a mode of change fits with how government is setting up. Firstly, the ratification vote that council makes, and then secondly, the processes after that. It's quite difficult to see how a private plan change would slot in around that. Government seems to have a pretty clear idea in its mind of the steps that it expects council to go through. There is no mention in any of the bill around how a private plan change would work. So it's a really tricky question, and I'm sure there are many rooms for lawyers to occupy, because this is new, evolving legislation. Yet again, stuff that we've never actually seen before. So we're all trying to figure it out, and I think, as I say, that's an ongoing conversation, but I felt a duty to signal that I don't see an easy path, and we'll just have to keep talking, and I'm sure we will. Your first question, it's important for the community to have quite a clear set of rules and regulations to work to. That everybody needs to be on the same page about what you can do by right as a permitted activity, what you need a resource consent for. So the district plan is ultimately the Bible when it comes to that. Everyone needs to be able to look in that document and have a single source of truth about your rights and responsibilities, really. This is why this ultimately is a plan change question. I am not really sure how you could sort of send a signal outside of doing a plan change either. But again, like, open to hearing and talking about ideas around that. But at the end of the day, if council is of a mind to want to change the settings, then it needs to follow the RMA process set out for it.
Thank you, Jason. So we'll move on to Mr. Bouncler.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want me to clarify?
Oh, you can.
So yes, thank you. All good to speak?
Yes.
Yep. Cool. Thank you, Madam Chair. So two things. Just like to clarify that the example development that's been given by the public speaker is not actually within the Wakanai Garden Precinct. It's in the town centre area and across from the railway lines, if that's right.
Yes.
So it's not quite. It's not. It's not in the defined garden precinct area. Yeah. So it's not. Oh yeah, but just don't expect that that's what you're going to see. in
Through
any
the
current
chair, please.
developments. Sorry.
Speaking through the chair, please.
Sorry.
Speaking through the chair, please, rather than across the table.
Yeah. Sorry. So that's just one thing. Point to note.
So maybe if Mr. Holland can answer that question.
We haven't actually done a paper here which is trying to get into the issues around 14 to 16 Narara Road. So I'm sorry, but we haven't really got the advice in front of you to sort of delve into the specifics of that.
That's Utah Street. So that, I suppose that's outside.
Sorry, until I actually haven't got that piece of paper or seen it before today. So.
Okay, we'll ask for clarification later.
Yeah.
But I note your question, and I think you could be correct.
We're certainly happy if there's any doubt around the boundaries of the Wakanai Garden Precinct area. Happy to circulate a copy of a map which will clarify that for you. It's simple to do.
I think it's fair to say that that was not mentioned as part of Michelle's presentation.
Yeah, so we just want to make sure
Thank
that. So my actual proper question, thank you, Madam Chair. So Jason, with recommendation A4, that staff develop advice to inform future decision. So this work that's going to be ongoing, I assume you'll be looking at some of the vision work that the various areas have been done to try and inform what the communities would like with their town centres, developments, etc., etc. I assume also there are some good points from the MDRS to keep, you know, those sort of density requirements so that we don't start expanding everywhere and taking up all the arable land in the area. Not quite sure if we want to see, you know, Paraparaumu join into Waikanae, join into Otaki and carry on. To what, and I know this won't be an easy question to answer, to what sort of depth will the staff be working on advice to bring to council?
Yeah, there is a bit to that. So, like, I think it would be premature for me to start trying to offer you advice on the hoof about what council's future decision should be. There is a lot of work that needs to be done there, so I won't do that. Look, the growth strategy at a bigger picture level, putting the MDRS details to one side and just thinking about how does the district want to grow, talks a lot about both intensification and greenfield. Yep. And the reason why the growth strategy talked a lot about intensification is there are some benefits to intensification, particularly when you're thinking around centres, opportunities to improve the vibrancy and vitality of our centres. Greater population density around centres should be really good for our businesses. That's really important. In terms of sort of reducing carbon emissions and from a transport point of view, actually makes a lot of common sense to have populations around services as well. And there are lots of things around our rural areas that the community has consistently voiced in terms of, I'm sure in the Vision Kapiti consultation, as well as during the development of the growth strategy, our communities value our green spaces. And so the balance between greenfield and intensification, the growth strategy really did put quite a lot of emphasis on intensification.
Okay, so that's likely to stay, which is sort of what I was...
Well, look, that'll be a decision for future council to make as to how it wants to look at that balance, but I think you'll always see advice coming from officers that will point out that intensification has got some quite good features about it, and greenfield isn't a walk in the park.
Excellent. Cool. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Now we move on to Councillor Halliday. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to get some clarity on something. When we went through PC2, there was a lot of talk about how do we protect these precincts, a lot of talk and that sort of stuff. And as you've pointed out, it was a very, very hard, well, it's next to impossible to do due to the direction that we had. But the two things that were pointed out as protections were the qualifying matters and the fact that we had these key Indigenous trees and a lot of them in that precinct as well. Now, what's happened here with regards to Nanara Road was, you know, rights or wrongs, something I was concerned was going to happen in that area, and it's happened. So were there no, should we say, were there no key Indigenous trees per se, or items like that in that, just should we say by coincidence, there just had to be no Indigenous trees or protection trees or anything in those particular spaces, should we say, which allowed this to go through the way that it has? Because I appreciate that councils can only do certain things with regards to a process, with regards to requirement from a developer. As long as they stick within certain rules, there's not a heck of a lot we can do. And that's around the non-notified as well. But is that the situation sort of what happened here? I mean, I appreciate it's a lot more complex than that. But I would have thought that might have been, I mean, that's one of the reasons why it was like, okay, well, this needs to be sorted out. How do we sort it out after PC2 is done, because of the options that we've been given? Sounds like there's a pathway here, but it's still years away. And And I was hoping that a planned change might speed that process, but what I'm hearing, that might not be the case. It might take just as long, but it might not even get the outcome that's was wanted by the residents there, and by us as a council, because we did confirm that area as a precinct. But these trees, was that in this particular situation? Was that they just not that there wasn't any sort of those sorts of protections there?
Yeah, again, if you're talking about specific properties, it's not something that I've
I appreciate
personally
that.
looked at.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any non-compliance issues. So I'll give you, I guess, a slightly bigger picture answer, and that is that every council has to balance, I guess, how much protection it affords to vegetation, ecological areas, versus also providing for growth, providing for development, providing for property owners to be able to do some stuff without having too much of a regulatory burden that is ridiculous. That's a balance that is I guess, really difficult one to strike. And it's always open for council to revisit whether it thinks it's got that balance correct. There have been, the district plan has evolved over time, and there have been decisions made around how important does a vegetation have to be in order to reach a level that it deserves protection. And some of those I think were made in about the 2010s, different plan changes over time. Again, these are things that a council has the ability to re-look at and re-evaluate whether that balance is right. And if it wants to basically provide for more protection, tip that balance in a different direction, maybe protect some trees and areas that didn't meet a test that looks like this, because it wants to actually protect more, it might change that test. It's always open to council on the process for doing that's a plan change. I would only just add that there is no free lunch with this stuff. There will be those who support a move like that, but there are costs that go with that in terms of constraining people's ability to do things. That's how it works. That's how protections work.
The constant rub that we do have. Yep. Thank you for that.
So if I can just ask another question along the lines that Councillor Halliday asked, is that in terms of these special character areas, we considered whether or not we could designate them as other qualifying matters. How many other councils around the country actually did find ways to designate those as other qualifying matters?
You mean how, like in terms of sort of special character
Yes,
areas
yes.
around the country?
Yeah,
Like
and how do they manage to protect them, unlike us?
Yeah. It's not something I've looked at since we've done PC2 specifically, and I guess I'd remind council that all of the 10 to 15 councils around the country were all being asked to sprint headlong to notification at exactly the same time. There was, while we certainly had conversations as Wellington councils with each other to try to share ideas and understandings of things, the reality is the bill got passed in late 2021 and it said you have to notify a plan change in August 2022. So get on with it. And we did, and we met the time frame as a council that government told us to do. But that didn't leave a lot of time for conversation and collaboration to look at options. And so inevitably, councils landed in slightly different spaces on this. And I'm not passing any judgment on whether other councils got it right or wrong. I guess the key thing with special character areas is in the relevant section of the RMA, which is listed in this paper, 77I or something, there are qualifying matters that are listed, and then at the end of that list, there's basically any other qualifying matter But if you can only hook in on the any other qualifying matter, it took you down a much more complicated evidentiary path. And you'll recall that the officers did provide advice to the best of their ability within the time frame that we had on this. It wasn't walked past lightly by council, but it was determined that special character areas weren't able to meet that test.
Thank you, Jason. So now I move on to Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I just want to make a point of clarification, if I can, around the presentation earlier. One of these examples that were given were merely that, an example. And although that doesn't sit directly in the garden precinct, there are other developments in the Waikanae Garden Precinct and the society that is being sparked into action. 14 to 16 Narara Road is one of the ones that they had great concern about. So on a 2-section lot of land, there was 20 dwelling units proposed. And these kinds of examples which were presented to this committee were the concerns that they validly were raising. So it wasn't done this morning to mislead anybody, and they would always declare. It was never said that this is in the garden precinct. So I just want to make that point of clarification, if I can, to the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. So now, Councillor Coe, second turn.
Look, I was just proposing to move the recommendations, but I noticed Shelley's got her light on with a question, so did you want to ask your question before I move or after, or?
Just, yeah, about the time and what can happen in between. I think that, yeah, I can do that.
When, you can do it after I move. So, I'd like to move the recommendations as.
I actually have some questions that I wanted to ask.
Well, we can ask questions after it's been moved,
Okay,
I presume.
okay. So, Councillor Coe has proposed to move all the recommendations
Yeah,
on
A1
page,
to A5, yeah.
page 6. I have a second for those. Okay, Mr. Moore, thank you. If I can just have quiet when other people are speaking, please.
Yeah, stop the chatting.
So I have, actually, would you like to speak to,
Yeah, I would,
Yes, please.
because I think, this is a matter of extreme interest to people in our community, and when we were deliberating on PC2, it was like we had one arm up our backs from government. It was very, very restrictive, and we had to take actions that we weren't entirely comfortable with in order to meet government requirements. And this is a classic example, the matter in relation to the garden precinct, of where we were between a rock and a hard place. And I think now that we have an opportunity to review that, we absolutely should look at, to me it's a no-brainer, we should review it, but we need some information to come back to this table around that. Should we review it? If we were to do so, what direction might that take, what it might look like? I think it would be criminal not to do that. We need to look at this issue in the light of legislation which is more enabling of things that we would like to achieve in that area. So it's absolutely imperative that we, certainly in terms of A4, that we have some information come back to council that looks at how we deal with this new regulatory framework. So yeah, that's about all I wish to say. Let's keep moving in the right direction. And yes, as you say, Jason, there's tensions there, that there's conflict of interest. There's some people that may wish to develop their properties within that area. Some people wish to keep that character. So all that needs to be taken into account as we move forward, and we need to get the right balance in whatever solution we come up with. But today we're not deciding on that. All we're doing is really saying this is something we want to take a closer look at in the light of a new framework. So yeah, that's all I want to say by way of introduction. Thank you.
thank you, Councillor Coe. So while I've got the mic, I will welcome Councillor Wilson and Deputy Mayor Kirby to this meeting. Nice to see a number of councillors who aren't members of this committee attending today. It shows the importance of this topic. So my question probably relates to 14.1, which is on page 9, it's about us opting out of this, which is basically what one of the recommendations is, to progress the work that we need to do that. And it's about demonstrating that 30 years housing. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, we had developed this growth strategy in 2022, which basically did that. And so I'm just wondering whether or not that growth strategy needs to be updated, and whether or not it's actually on our growth plan, on our work program, because I actually looked and I couldn't actually see it. So if you could clarify that, please, and whether or not it actually needs to be.
So I think that's a really good question around, does the growth strategy need to be reviewed? And there is certainly some thinking going on around that, and I would include or recommend that when provided we get the endorsement today to go out and do some more work, I think the need to review the growth strategy is part of the work that we would commission. It feels a bit odd to me that we would, for example, let's play out that council did want to amend the MDRS at least. The growth strategy, as worded at the moment, was quite deliberately designed to meet the national direction of the day. And we would want to get some advice around, could you actually progress a plan change to amend the MDRS if your growth strategy is still there saying something at odds with where you want to take the district plan? So I think that's a really good question, and our intention will be to look at that as part of that further advice.
So thank you for that. So given that then, is it a given that would be included in there, or should we include it in that recommendation? Well, actually, I suppose it's not we're endorsing that, but would it be appropriate maybe to have a separate recommendation? And I suppose it's about the timing of that doing that work as well, because as I said, when I looked, I couldn't see that it was in our current work program, and I don't know whether I just missed it or whether it's not actually there.
So I think you are going to be getting in the near future a conversation around the policy work program, which will be a good chance to explore where the growth strategy review might be at. Look, that's actually a topic that you've raised that I've already had a conversation with the Waikanae Garden Precinct about. So from my point of view, I don't think you need to add it because it's already in my mind. And I would also wonder, if you're going to add one thing, kind of where does it end a little bit? So I think you can, from my point of view, I would like to look at it, and I would certainly be looking to include it if you collectively endorsed A4.
Okay, so then, to me, it's the overall framework, because I know there's lots of little bits, but to me, it's if you've got that framework in place, then everything falls into place. So, just to be very, I suppose, pedantic here, which probably is the right word, is what time frame would you be looking at to actually review that?
Well, ultimately, I think we'd be looking to make sure that we'd be able to move as soon as possible to giving advice to council, but it'll have to be, of course, after the bill turns into law and the relevant section has effect, and when we've actually generated the advice. So there's a bit of work to be done there around some sort of project planning, but as said in this paper, the bill itself is unlikely to turn into law. Certainly nobody's talking about it the first half of this year. I attended a seminar, DLA Piper, yesterday about this topic, and they said the end of 2025 that it might turn into law. And so that gives you some indication. It would have to be after the bill turns into law that council starts receiving that advice.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. So, Councillor Hanford.
Yeah, kia ora, and sorry for the side conversation that was happening before. Just want to acknowledge that was probably a little bit distracting. Thanks, Jason, for explaining the staging of things, and it kind of makes you wonder, if we have a change of government next year, then what position are we left in if quite literally the legislation's just become an act of Parliament, and then you know, we've got that year window, and then next minute there is quite literally an election. So I guess that's one consideration, but no doubt already something you're thinking about. I just wanted to also kind of seed some thought around the fact that there are kind of principles and commitments that council has signalled that and we've agreed to, such as our district-wide emissions reduction target of net zero by 2040. So that kind of is a cross-cutting commitment. And also our top 10 priorities. And as Cam mentioned, the visioning work, I'm quite keen to also understand how this fits in with the master planning work that is kind of flowing from the visioning, and then how the master planning, as Councillor Pravanov talked to, then fits in with the growth strategy. So there's kind of, a bunch of moving pieces, it feels like, in that space. So it'd be really good to understand how they kind of fit together and complement each other in the hierarchy of those things, in terms of then what we use to help inform, I guess, what is the kind of most maybe impactful tool we have, and the most powerful tool, which is the district plan, because that's the ultimate kind of rules of things. So yeah, really happy to support the progression of work and analysis to enable council to make a decision, but I also just want to make sure that that special character sentiment is balanced with an understanding of the commitment that I think quite a few people have around the table to housing and climate action as well, and how those tensions that Councillor Coe spoke to. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Hanford. So, Councillor Warwick?
So my question was around timing. If this bill is not going to be coming in until the end of this year, then what would be the earliest point at which council can make a decision on changing the district plan? Like, realistically, we've then got probably new people around the table, and we've got to go through all the briefings and get everyone up to speed. So what would be, in the interim, there's likely to be development outside of what maybe the decision will land on. So what's the time frame?
So where the bill is at right now is submissions closed on, I think, the 10th of February, and then it's going to go through the various readings, select committee process before that. What you see now is probably not what you're going to get in terms of the final act. They always change. They get improved, hopefully. So I think while we can get the ball rolling quite soon, we obviously need to go through a procurement process to get the necessary support. Until we actually see the final wording of the law as it is to be changed, there are some kind of limits to how far we can go. So when you're thinking about the timing of advice back to council, we need to obviously do some quite detailed project planning around that, but it's going to have to be some time after the bill turns into law, which, as I've indicated and you've just mentioned, may not be until the end of 2025. So it's, in all reality, it's likely to be 2026 that the next council will actually be able to really get some meaty advice. And I understand, because I've talked with the Waikanae Garden Precinct representatives, that look, that's not ideal, and there are concerns about development in the interim. I understand that.
Thank you, Jason. So lastly, Councillor Wilson.
Yep, I just wanted to support what Councillor Coe was saying, and in terms of the endorsement of A4, I did have some queries about the timeline, and to what Sophie was saying, a change of government could just, so we have to, I think sometimes councils have to make plans independent of what central government's doing, apart from where you've obviously directed. So what assurances are we able to give the people of, say, because it's been used as an example, Waikanae Garden District, that Charlie doesn't go and buy up half a Horapito Road and get the chainsaws out and turn it into a massive housing development. So are there any assurances that we can give to those residents that the breaks are going on this? So does A4, does adopting this sort of indicate that that council is moving towards a certain direction, so it would stop that, or are developers just able to
Might speed them up.
continue with the destruction? And in fact, yes, it could in fact speed them up. And so that was the brakes on that. And then the last part is, how does this, given people want to protect the environment around which they live, and if they see this process as being too slow or cumbersome or never ending, how do we accommodate private plan changes?
So I think maybe it might have been before you
Few questions in there.
arrived, Councillor Wilson, around the private plan change question.
Oh.
But if I just, I guess, quickly recap on that, the answer I gave to a question similar to that was government seems to be setting up a process whereby step one, council makes its ratification vote. Does it want to keep, biff or fiddle with the MDRS? And then it's setting up it actually is making councils use a streamlined planning process if it wishes to fiddle with it, basically, or remove it, if my memory serves me right. That's the process that government has set up, and I mentioned earlier that the concerns I have around a private plan change, and I've got an open mind to hearing, because I don't know everything, but I'm struggling to see how a private plan change can fit in around the steps that government seems to be wanting to set up in order for councils to revisit the decisions they made. But hey, this is new and evolving legislation, and who knows what it'll look like at the end of the day. And there are some very bright people around the place who might be able to figure out a way through it. I'm just struggling to see it right now, and I've shared that with the precinct group. Your first part of your statements there. So the precinct area does have a lot of qualifying matters in it, which are effectively barriers to intensification. Some of them are harder to jump than others, but they mean that the MDRS just doesn't apply automatically, and it's not a permitted activity to do what the MDRS allows you to do. There are a lot of areas in the Waikanae Garden precinct that are either ecological sites or a site that has a notable tree on it or a site that has key indigenous tree or trees on it. There are areas that are subject to flood hazard. Collectively, that means that the whole precinct area is not just up for grabs, if you like. There are actually constraints on it. But it remains the case that it needs to have a plan change in order, if council was of a mind to want to reintroduce more protective mechanisms that enshrine a lower density world, the only way to do that is a plan change.
Cool. Yep.
Thank you very much, Jason, again. So I think we've come to the end of questions and comments. So I'd like to thank Jason for fronting this paper today, and for staff who've presented it to us. We've had some very thought-provoking questions from the table. Very interesting public speaker on this matter, and so I think we're well prepared now to look at these recommendations on page 6. So we have a mover and a seconder. So all those in favour of all these recommendations, or all these recommendations, say aye. Pardon? I'll just ask them, is there any further debate or closing comments?
Is there any debate, or
Do you have any closing comments?
I think just in closing, I think picking up on the point that Councillor Wilson just made and Jason's response, that time is of the essence here because we have a current situation that allows things that perhaps we may not wish to allow further down the track once we review. So I think we need to hit the ground running when as soon as we're able to look at this and potentially make changes. I think we need to be well prepared in advance of that time so that we can act with speed to get things in place and preferably before the next election, get things sorted the way we want to have them. So I just really think it's a matter of not really urgency, but we need to progress with speed to make sure we're well prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coe. So recommendations is laid out on page 6. All those in favour? Those against? The recommendations are passed. Thank you. Thank you, staff. Okay, so now I know it's that probably went a bit longer than we anticipated, but I think it was a very important conversation. So we will now move on to item 8.2, which is update on the Omnibus Reserve Management Plan, and I think Yolanda is going to come and speak to us. Thank you. I'll present the paper.
Hawani's going to come up to
Who is?
Hawani as well.
What's his name?
Hawani.
So welcome to Yolanda and Ioane. Floor is yours.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for having us back to give you another update on the Omnibus Reserve Management Plan. I think the last time we came to you was mid last year, and we told you at that stage that we had a whole lot of homework to do on the properties that we own and manage as parks and reserves throughout the district. The Act requires us to know quite a lot of background information about those parcels of land. And so we've spent a lot of time, and Hawani's done a lot of research looking at over 400 parcels of land that the council owns or manages for open space purposes, looking into the history of that land, how it came to be in the ownership of council, the reason council acquired the land in the first place, and what we currently use the land for. The Act does require us to understand all of this information before we can actually prepare a reserve management plan for it. So the Act also requires us to formalise those uses through the classification process. And you might recall last year we talked about the fact that we're running 2 concurrent processes. One is the classification of all of our unclassified parks and reserves, where that's appropriate, and the other one is to prepare the Omnibus RMP. So we've now done that homework. We've got a really good record of all the properties that we're managing for open space purposes. We've got 126 parks and reserves in total, made up of over 400 parcels of land. The vast majority of those are used and were actually acquired for recreational purposes. So they're your neighbourhood playgrounds, urban open spaces, neighbourhood pocket parks, our main district-wide and destination parks and sports fields. We also have a large number of esplanade reserves, both freshwater and coastal esplanade reserves that we look after. We have a lesser number of scenic, historic and nature reserves. So that's essentially a little bit of a background of what we've got. The Act does require, before we prepare an RMP, before we even notify the public that we're intending to prepare a reserve management plan for these properties, the Act does require that we formally classify those parks and reserves for the purpose for which we acquired them. So we've been working very closely with our iwi partners over the last 12 months to work towards what we believe collectively are the right classifications for each of those parks and reserves. And as you'll appreciate, with 400 of them, that's been a bit of a process. I think potentially only 20% of our parks and reserves were already classified. So we've had a number to work through. Once the sites are formally classified, we can then notify our intention to prepare a reserve management plan. Now, Council has about 20 reserve management plans in total, but many of them are well over 30 years old now, so they're pretty well outdated. Once we've got some formal classifications in place and we've moved some of our milestones to make sure we have those appropriate conversations with our iwi partners before we come to council and confirm those classifications. We want to make sure everybody's on board with us. Once we've got those classifications ratified through a council meeting, through a resolution, and we've gazetted those classifications, we can then notify our intention to prepare an omnibus reserve management plan. So rather than look at updating the reserve management plans that we've got and preparing another 100 or so reserve management plans for the other parks and reserves, we're going to look at one omnibus reserve management plan for all of our parks and reserves. That will essentially have a look to it where it's in two phases. One is a general policy type document, which sort of outlines what we're managing our open spaces and our open space resources for, what activities can and can't happen in the reserves, those types of things. And then there'll be a second section which is more specific to each of the properties and each of the groups of properties, I guess. So in terms of the development of the reserve management plan itself, the Act does specify quite a prescriptive process that needs to be followed. And the first part of that is to notify publicly our intention to prepare a reserve management plan and state which reserves we're preparing that plan for. That then kicks off a public notification engagement phase, which will be about 5 weeks, which will go out to the community and ask them what sort of values they have around our public open spaces, what sorts of things they'd like to see more of, what sort of activities they don't think should be allowed to occur, where they think there should be more biodiversity and environmental incentives and those types of issues. So once we've got all of that feedback back in, we'll analyse that and draft the reserve management plan. There's then a second phase where that draft is released for public submission and then a hearing process not dissimilar to the district plan process. So that's essentially what we wanted to let you know today is an update of where we've been. We've got a lot coming up over the next 12 months, so you probably will see within the next few months the public social media campaign and us out and about talking to the community about what sort of things they want to see happen with the parks and reserves and how they want them managed going forward. I think that's the brief update. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Yolanda. So I'll move on to Councillor Coe for questions.
Thank you. This is a significant area of expenditure for council, parks and reserves, and in the light of the pressure, financial pressure we're under at the moment, I'm just wondering whether, as part of this management plan, we're considering those open spaces that are sitting there idly, and whether there's any opportunity to rationalise some of our open spaces. I can think of 2 pieces of land in Te Horo, for example, one next to the Te Horo Hall and the other one at the southern end of Te Horo Beach, which have been sitting vacant for a long time. No one seems to know what we're doing with them. Sorry, Gawler Street, that's right, yep. No one seems to know what they're intended for. They have no clear purpose. I'm sure if there's 2 in Te Horo, there's probably a few elsewhere that are in the same category. So are we reviewing that and you know, is there an opportunity to say, well, actually, some of this land that we have is surplus and why don't we, for example, sell the land next to Te Horo Hall to the Te Horo Hall people for $1 or something and get it off our hands. We don't have to then maintain it and, you know, it's off our books. So will that be looked at?
Yeah, 100%. So part of the process that we've been going through with doing the stock take is to get an understanding of the legal status of each of our parks and reserves and also what the current use is. So we do have a small handful, maybe 20 parks and reserves that you would know as a park or a reserve, may even be known as a name of a reserve that aren't actually reserves under the Reserves Act. So those fee simple lots aren't reserves under the Reserves Act. So the process to use them for another purpose is a lot more straightforward. Anything that has already been declared a reserve under the Reserves Act, but not necessarily classified, has to go through the process of lifting the reserve status, which is a public participation process.
Yeah.
At this stage, what we're looking at doing is only classifying and moving forward with the RMP on those parks and reserves that we know are currently were acquired for open space and have some sort of asset on them or some other type of use or value that we know that we currently need for an open space purpose. There are a handful of properties that we will be talking further with the economic development team and the strategic property team in the coming months, essentially, to see if there's other uses for that land. So that's certainly something that we are currently working through.
So will they be identified as part of this process?
So we've identified the ones that are not currently reserves under the Act and ones that we think maybe need to be considered in that process. So
Right.
now we need to enter into a conversation with other parts of the council to see if there's other uses.
And are we identifying those that are currently listed as reserves, but where it might be logical to remove that designation?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And so when we go to full council with our resolution to classify these properties, that's when that discussion will be able to have at a council level as well. With our recommendation, we'll set out why we believe it should be that second formal process should occur.
Yeah.
So we would need to
That sounds very
justify
sensible.
why we're classifying it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Code. So now we move on to Councillor Cooper.
Just a question specifically about McLean Park, which has its own management plan. I think it's due for review either 2027, I think it is off the top of my head. Is that, are you not looking at reclassifying that because it's got its own management plan?
No, we're not. We won't be looking at this stage at reclassifying any classified land, and
Okay.
McLean Park is fully classified.
Yep. Just do note that the consultation done around that management plan in 2017 actually won awards, national awards for consultation with the community, and it's certainly that park's got heavy investment by the wider community. Actually, it's a fabulous park. It's beautiful.
So McLean Park will be included in the omnibus management plan, but we'll be taking a lot of that work that's already done and going back to the community.
Yep. Yeah, council done a great job doing that. I'd hate to see that unravelled.
Understood.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. So I now move on to Mr. Olsen.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to ask the reverse question to Liz. So there's some parcels of land which people may consider as reserves today or be used as reserves which aren't classified as reserves?
That's correct, and we will be recommending that they are classified as reserves. At this stage, what we're looking at doing is looking at the land we already have declared as reserve and classifying that. The next step will be looking at land that's not currently a reserve, and that's part of the wider process, and looking at whether that should actually be declared and classified a reserve. I think an example you'll be aware of recently was Leon Keo. I think we all thought it was a reserve. It wasn't until we wanted to look at formally putting a sign up that we realised it wasn't either declared a reserve nor classified. So that was the correct process there, and each park and reserve will have the same sort of justification in terms of what we're recommending.
And that's looking at all green space which the council owns?
It's not looking at all the green space. Council has a lot of stormwater reserves, for instance. It's looking at land that we own and manage for open space purposes. So recreational reserves, your neighbourhood parks, nature reserves, scenic reserves, that type of thing. So the key purpose has to be an open space purpose as opposed to an infrastructure purpose.
Okay, and just quickly, can you just summarise, what is the process actually to turn a bit of land into an official reserve? Who does it go through? Does it go to council, or what's the process on that?
That's correct. So to clear land and classify it as a reserve, it has to follow a public notification process and a full resolution by council. Once that's been through the process, it is then gazetted in the Gazette, and then we let LINZ know and they update the title.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olsen. So Councillor Warwick.
Is there anywhere where that information, the 400 parcels of land and where it's parks and reserves, is there anywhere where that's easy to see? A map or anything?
Yep, we do both have a spreadsheet and a map. We can provide that.
Okay. And maybe it would be handy to colour code the different, it would be interesting to see district area by area where the parcels of land are and exactly what, purple for reserve, blue for water, infrastructure, if that's possible. Or if it's too much work, it would be good to see that.
I do believe our strategic property team have something along those lines. We certainly have it for anything that's not an infrastructure use, for an open space use, and can provide that. But I'll see what we can provide.
Okay, and you'll send that out to the committee? That'd be great. Thank you.
Good question, Councillor Warwick. So we'll now move on to Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I had the same question in terms of being an availability of a list of what there is. I'm assuming that a large number of these are pieces of land that were given in lieu of property developments.
Certainly the more recent ones are. We've got some that have been passed down from our predecessor councils, which have a complex history, I guess, and some of those have required actually legal advice to find out the current status of those. A large number of them, I would say, 50 to 60% are being passed through the subdivision process. So taken as a lot or two as part of a development in lieu of contributions or whatever the situation was back in, before we had the RMA and that facility.
And I just wanted to, given the scope of this, which is pretty broad and there's a lot involved, it's been mentioned before, but there's a piece of land right next to the Te Horo Hall. I'll just use this as an example. It's a piece of land there. The locals could find an immediate use for it. So is it necessary to wait until all of this comes back together, or are there individual circumstances like that where council could look at it, make a relatively quick decision and move on?
There certainly is the opportunity to do that, and we did just that with Leon Keel. When we had the community board come to us and want a sign put up, we moved forward with that one pretty quickly, and that process went pretty smoothly. So I guess it's just a matter of letting us know. We're happy to look into any parcels of land that you think need looking into and making a recommendation on those.
Great, thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Move on to Mr. Moore.
Thank you. Look, I don't want to sound like a broken record on Te Horo, but we've got lots of good, strong advocates for that rural community. Just a little bit of context on this. I know the property team have been tasked with putting a paper before the community board, the Waikanae Community Board, very shortly, about that lot adjoining the Te Horo Hall, because the Te Horo Hall Society own the hall and adjoining property that they rent out for income, and the tennis courts behind it is all owned by the community. The lot of land was acquired in '93 for quite a small sum, about 170,000, I recall, because the then hall committee couldn't afford it, but they thought it was a good acquisition. And it was purchased by the then council for the purpose of a car park. School Road, who anybody knows, is really narrow. When you have any number of people at that community facility, that road becomes really dangerous for parking on, as we found at a recent reopening of the earthquake strengthening. So it was acquired in '93, 32 years ago, and it's never been turned into that officially. Council have never invested money into it. It's hard to maintain, levelling it and even mowing it. The locals have occasionally gone in and done that. So this proposal going before the community board will consider how we could move that through for ownership or lease or management by...
GPS signal lost.
Is lost. Yes, it's probably talking about that lot of land which is lost. So I just want to record that in saying that we're really delighted that that is coming before the community board, not at the next meeting, I'm told, but the one after, and we'll then bring it back before council, I presume, for a full vote. So thank you for your work on this, Yolanda.
Thank you, Councillor, Mr. Moore, and very pleased to hear that work is progressing. Councillor Hanford.
Yeah, kia ora, I'll be super brief. Firstly, thank you so much for the swift action on the Leon Keel front. That was really awesome to get that through the community board and then, decision being made by council, so appreciate that. A question around, so following council passing a resolution, potentially, if that's the decision of the table, to notify the intent to prepare the RMP, how long does the kind of cascading of all the, because there are quite a few steps that follow that, like what's the kind of broad time frame for this bit of work overall?
Yeah, that's a good question. As you can appreciate, it's going to be quite a large document. We're going to try and cover all of our 126 parks and reserves to some extent, and we're also working alongside in a co-design approach with our iwi partners. So balancing those resource requirements is probably going to be our biggest challenge over the next 12 months. Having said that, we also don't want to let this drag on. So once we do notify our intention to prepare, we'll go into about a 5-week community engagement phase. Following that, we'll take on board all of that feedback and assess it, and then essentially we have to sit down and write a draft RMP. We are having meetings over the next couple of weeks with iwi about how they will be involved in that process and what sort of resources that they can provide to us. A lot to sit alongside us and sort of pen that document, and potentially we'll be looking at arranging some council workshops as well. So it's we're going to have a look and see how much feedback we get from the community, whether it's what we expect or whether we get a few left field ones. And I'm really hoping we could have a draft even for internal purposes by the end of the year.
The end of this
Calendar year.
Yeah, cool. Okay, awesome. Thanks for that.
We've done a lot of the background work, so.
Yeah, awesome. And thanks for all the background work too.
Thank you, Councillor Hanford. Councillor Warwick.
As youth use open spaces and parks a lot, how are you planning to engage the youth when you're in a consultation? Are you going to go out to schools and talk to them?
Yeah, so we are developing a comms and engagement plan with our comms team. So we're taking their advice on a lot of it. We're going to be going to the community markets. We're going to be looking at going out to schools and also approaching some local teachers about potentially getting them involved with the Have Your Say platform. So we feel like that could be a good learning process for the children as well. And there's a youth council too that I think we will look at tapping into.
So thank you, Councillor Warwick. So I've actually got a similar question, and so I suppose so it seems that there has been a number of discussions going on between, I suppose, various parties and our partners, but there are also a number of these reserves have focus groups and they have volunteers. Have you reached out to them because it's my understanding, I'm part of the Farrells Reserve, and I know that the members of the Farrells Reserve are asked for input into this, and that hasn't actually happened. And so I'm just wondering, to get as much information as possible beforehand, before you go out to public consultation, would it not be good to actually include some of those people who work very, very closely in some of these reserves?
We're a little bit constrained, and the Act doesn't allow us to appear to be doing that until we've publicly notified our intention.
Right.
So once we can get that public notice out, that's when we'll hit the ground running with all of that stakeholder consultation. So what we have done is we've done some internal consultation with internal groups within the council, and what we intend to do, and I think we've already got them drafted, is the minute that we notify our intent, which has to be after a full council resolution to do that, then we have letters to go out to stakeholders inviting them to meetings and those types of things. So
Okay.
100% that's the intention. We just have to be careful on timing because we haven't actually notified our intention to prepare the plan yet. The Act is a bit old and a bit cumbersome, but we are trying our best to.
Thank you. So what type of groups are those internal groups you've already talked to?
Other parts of the council.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Yolanda, for presenting this paper and for staff for writing it. I will now move to page 11 where we have our one recommendation. That's basically noting this update and the next steps for the development of this Omnibus Reserve Management Plan. So can I ask for a mover? Councillor Warwick, and seconded by Councillor Hanford. Do you wish to speak to the recommendation? Thank you. Okay, so I'll put it to the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is passed. Thank you very much. Thank you. So now we'll take a 15-minute break, if that's okay. Come back here about 25 past. Thank you.